Hi again, John Nielsen, Wing Chun Hall, with more on how Wing Chun is your best self-defense option. Wing Chun provides phenomenal self-defense, and yet is a target of many misconceptions. I've observed that false origin stories are responsible for many of these misconceptions. In order to dispel these myths, Ben and I wrote this book, looking not only at oral traditions, but also at political and historical documents and social trends of the period. In doing so, we found an origin that is both more plausible and more impressive than any oral tradition yet put forth. I would like to share that with you. However, I'd also like to take you partially through the process we went through of presenting and eliminating possibilities before coming to the most likely conclusion. Now, if you'd like to skip all of that and not wait for me to finish all of these videos, buy the book. There's a link below. Otherwise, we need to get back to Yip Man's story. In my previous history video, I provided evidence shattering the secret society's myth of the 1726 destruction of Shaolin and how the Wing Chun community borrowed that story. Part 2 is Nguyen's story. Part 3 is Yim Yi's story, and Part 4 is Wing Chun's story. I've combined those parts in this video because they merge and have similar origins. Yip Man's story of Nguyen includes only these details. 1. She was an abbess. 2. She escaped from the destruction of Shaolin. 3. She fled to White Crane Temple on Mount Tai Lung. And 4. She helped Wing Chun defeat a bully and avoid an unwanted marriage. However, most other versions include a vignette in which Nguyen witnesses a fight between a crane and some other creature. Supposedly from this, she was inspired to include evasive movements for women in her fighting system. This story links Wing Chun's origin story to that of other Chinese fighting systems. Stanley Henning, a martial artist and historical researcher, reports that a 16th century local gazette references a woman known as Ding No. 7 or Feng Qinlong, depending on your Chinese dialect. According to Henning, her father was a master at arms, and Feng learned from him and helped him teach. She became famous for her martial proficiency, and eventually, people began to tell exaggerated stories of her. The stories share these elements. 1. A girl called Feng or Ding, referred to as Lady 7, a number, like Moi, that is, fifth little sister or five plum blossoms. 2. From Yongshun or Wing Chun village in Fujian. 3. Knew how to fight, and 4. Encountered a crane, which taught her more about fighting. 5. She then taught her insights and founded the White Crane fighting system. There are many versions of these stories. In some, her father was a martial artist. In others, a Shaolin monk. Sometimes another monk was his friend and Feng's godfather. Sometimes, like Yim Yi, her father fled to escape hostile landlords or Qing injustice. Sometimes he was murdered by bandits or an unwelcome suitor, and Feng sought vengeance. Some versions say she achieved her vengeance. In others, she forgot about it. Sometimes the crane comes when Feng is doing laundry or applying makeup or in a dream. Sometimes the crane fights Feng or a snake, or it transforms itself into a white-haired beggar and trains her. In some stories, Feng marries one of her students or her godfather's son. Sometimes the marriage is happy, but other times it's unwanted, like Wing Chun's, so she becomes a nun, like Moi. Regardless of the creation myth you prefer, this style, White Crane from Wing Chun, was one of the first popular and commercial martial arts franchises. It spread from Fujian down to Guangdong and even across the ocean to Okinawa, where it has been handed down with a martial arts classic known as the Bubishi. If Henning has actually found the real Feng, these stories are at best an exaggeration of real events. Be that as it may, Feng's story shares many obvious similarities to that of Nguyen. White Crane's story predates Wing Chun's. Consequently, Henning and several others have concluded that Wing Chun was derived from the White Crane system. However, if one of the systems is a derivative of the other, the two should have much more in common than just the story, but they don't. In fact, White Crane has much more in common with Goju-Ryu Karate than it does with Wing Chun, despite the geographic and cultural factors that should have maintained a connection between the two Chinese systems. So far, the two parts of the Wing Chun myth we've examined have had two different origins, the secret societies and the White Crane fighting system. If we just stopped here, we might want to determine which of the two is the more legitimate, but there are many more parts to the story. Part 3. Yip Man says that Yim Yi was falsely accused and fled with his daughter from Guangdong to Sichuan, where they eventually met Moi. Familiarization with the culture explains this fear. 18th century Qing law enforcement meant that everyone associated with a crime, accused, victims, witnesses, and families, were all arrested and tortured until the authorities got the same story, whereupon the guilty were punished. Whether guilty or innocent, many would flee before they were caught. This part of the story has some basis in fact, and some versions of the White Crane story share this theme. However, a more likely source is the popular fiction of the late 19th and early 20th century in China. For example, Heroes of the Water Margin and Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Another example of how themes from popular fiction found their way into Wing Chun's creation myth come from the details of Wing Chun's unwanted marriage. Part 4 of Yip Man's story. In the official translation, Wing Chun was to marry a, quote, bully. but a better translation would be crime boss. In the period literature, this theme was often used as a ploy to force a young girl into a life of prostitution. To summarize, the crime boss threatens the father but offers to withdraw the threats in exchange for a marriage to the daughter, further promising a large dowry. The father is coerced into signifying that he received a fictitious dowry. The marriage is performed and consummated, but then the gangster's first wife refuses to accept the marriage, whereupon the girl is returned to the father and the non-existent dowry is demanded in return. Of course, the father can't repay money he never received, so the gangster insists that the girl work for him until the debt is paid. Again, this theme can be found in period literature like Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Heroes of the Water Margin. In our case, the story is about the crafty way in which the girl outwits the villain. In summary, the 4 parts of the Wing Chun story that we've reviewed have had origins from the secret societies, the White Crane creation myth, and from popular fiction, but all parts can be found in popular fiction. Bearing this in mind, the story becomes less of a cohesive origin story and more of a composite of several different fairy tales, much like, say, Into the Woods or Hoodwinked. Now, you'll see more of this trend as I discuss parts 5 through 7 in my next history video. In the meantime, if you'd like more details on the creation of Wing Chun and several other Southern Chinese fighting systems, check out my book at the link below. And if you want to get more information on how Wing Chun is your best self-defense option, subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.